I believe we're up to Perek Zayin Mishnah Vav, the 7th Perek, 6th Mishnah. So Kerem Revai, which we mentioned yesterday, was the 4th year's produce of your vineyard. You're supposed to take them to Shammai and eat them there. If you can't do that, then you can redeem them. So Shammai say, Ein le chaimish, ve'ein le beer. As opposed to by Meiser, where if you want to redeem your Meiser Sheni, you have to add a fifth, you have to add 25% to the value when you redeem it. By Kerem Revai, you just pay actual value, and there's no beer, there's no cutoff date by which you must redeem it. Beit Hillel says Yishlo, it has both of these things. You must add an extra 25% when you redeem your own, and you have to finish it by Pesach of the 3rd or 6th year. And then the piece relevant to our Masechta, Beit Shammai Armim Yishlei Parat v'Yishlei Elois. Beit Shammai says the grapes that fall when you're harvesting and the undeformed clusters, those halachas do apply even in the 4th year of your vineyard. V'haniyim paidin latzman, and the poor people take them, and they can redeem them for themselves and take that money to Yerushalayim. Beit Hillel no, kula lagas, the whole thing just goes straight into your wine press, because since it's property of Hekdesh and not property of individual, Hekdesh is not obligated in giving these things to the poor, so you process the whole thing and then you deal with it however you're going to deal with it, but it's considered Hekdesh's property. Mishnah Zayin, Kerem Shekula Elos, if the entire vineyard is all disformed clusters, Zeraim says the owner of the vineyard can keep them. Rabbi Kiva says no, they go to the poor. Amr Eliezer says, Ki Sivtsar, the pasuk says when you harvest your vineyard, you shouldn't take the disformed clusters. So if they're only disformed clusters, there's no harvest. So what would be the place to have this to give these clusters to the poor? Amr Kiva said to him, no. There's another verse. The pasuk says, you can't take the deformed clusters of your vineyard. That's going to apply even if all of the clusters are disformed. So what's he going to do with the first verse that says when you're harvesting you can't take the deformed clusters? That's just to tell you the poor do not have permission to take the deformed clusters before the time of the harvest. So they can't just come early in the season and take them out. Mishnah Ches, the last Mishnah in the Perek. Hamakdish Karmo, if someone gives his whole vineyard to Hekdesh, before the clusters have developed to the point where you can tell which ones are properly formed and which ones are not, then it's Hekdesh's property, and the deformed clusters don't go to the Aniyim. Hekdesh can sell them all to whoever wants to buy them. However, if the deformed clusters were already recognizable before he was Makdish, before he gave his field to Hekdesh, then the Olelot still belong to the Aniyim because those were already theirs, and he didn't have any ability to make them Hekdesh. Rabbi Yossi says, however, Yitnu Schar Gidulai LeHekdesh, the poor are going to have to give back to Hekdesh some money for growing their grapes, finishing up the grapes in their property. I don't know exactly how much of what number you'd put to that, but some portion of it is going to have to go back to Hekdesh because they're growing the grapes for the Aniyim. Ezehi Shikcha b'aretz. Ezehi Shikcha. So how do you define Shikcha by grapes? That I've moved on past this vine and I've forgotten to harvest it. So b'aretz, if the vine's on a trellis, then kol sheyachol hafshes yadai v'litla. Anything that you can reach from where you're standing, that's not shikcha because you don't have to go back to get it, and that the person picking the grapes could just reach back and take them. Uberagiles, if they're literally floor, if they're growing on the floor with no trellis, then mishayav himenu, when you go on past that vine, then you can't really reach back because they're low down on the ground. So when you move from one vine to the next, and anything left on the first vine is now considered shikcha and goes to the aniyim. Okay, let's start the 8th Perek. Me'emasai kol adam mutarim beleket. So leket, right, the stuff that you dropped when you harvest goes to the poor. At what point do we say that the poor are done with it? and now anyone who happens to see it could take it. And so, mishiyelchu nemushes, from when the nemushes go through, which are either the old men who walk with their canes, so they walk slow and they don't pass up stuff. They're not going quickly and just getting the big stuff, or the second group of people. So if when the second group of aniyim goes through the field, then again everyone assumes that by now there's nothing. All the other aniyim assume that by now it's not worth it anymore, so they give up any intent of collecting any leket from this field any further, and then the balbayis or anyone else could take it at that point because the aniyim have been mafked essentially. But Perek ba'olois, what about in a vineyard? When the aniyim go and come back, so one trip into the vineyard presumably will clean it out, and it's not going to be worth anyone's time to come anymore. What about olive trees? I assume there the olives are higher up and they can last a little bit longer. Once the second real rain comes of the year, so then again they assume there's nothing left. Rabbi Yehuda says, you can't use the second rain as a time when there are no olives left. Some people don't even pick their olives till after then. Rather, it's at the point where if an ani goes, he won't even get 4 iser, a small amount of money worth of olives, if out of his trouble of going into the vineyard. At that point already, the aniyim assume it's not worth it, and then anyone else who finds a few olives left could take them and enjoy their snack.